This happened after I went to university, so I was 18. I made an effort to make friends after I moved onto campus, and ended up with a few groups to hang out with, including a new girlfriend and plenty of people from my classes that I liked well enough. There was one class before lunch where it was traditional for people to go to the cafeteria afterwards to eat in pairs or threes. I wasn't very discerning about who I'd have lunch with because I got on fine with most people from the class, and we're all trying to make an effort to be social. So when one girl, Lily, asked if I wanted to get lunch together after that class, I didn't have any reason not to. We talked about school and that kind of thing, nothing noteworthy, but she did ask me to get lunch with her again the next week. It became a pattern, and there wasn't exactly a way to start saying no suddenly. It was fine, but it did mean I lost the chance to eat lunch with anyone else on those days. In hindsight, I suppose that was the point. One day in class, I asked someone if I could add them on social media. This happened in front of Lily. I saw her face jerk towards me from a couple of seats over. It was such a sharp reaction that it was hard to ignore, and I still remember it. By the time I got home later that day, Lily had sent me a friend request. No friends in common. Don't know how she knew my last name. I was a bit surprised, but I guess she just dug through the university's social media pages and found me through there. It gave me a bad feeling, but surely it was fine, right? She ended up messaging me a lot and commenting on anything I posted. I told myself that she was just awkward and we became friends, if not close. I'd known worse people. She still always got me to go eat lunch with her after our one shared class. Other than that, we rarely spent time together in person. I saw her around sometimes, but I never went out of my way to hang out with her. So it was mostly online messaging and seeing each other in group settings. Coincidentally, my girlfriend was also named Lily. This was something that clearly bothered Lily, not my girlfriend, who couldn't have found it less interesting. It's a common name. She occasionally hinted that she wanted my girlfriend to pick a different name, or joked about her not suiting it. She clearly didn't like my girlfriend at all, and I had an idea of why. It was hard to ignore by this point. Lily was starting to unsubtly hint that she had a crush on me. I tried not to address it because what was I gonna say? I'd never known what to do when a friend makes a pass on me. I was also not interested in the least. Even ignoring the weird stuff she pulled, Lily was not my type at all. She tended to dress and act in a way somewhere between a 50s housewife and one of those adults who is still obsessed with Disney princesses, if you can picture that. Things took an uncomfortable turn on the day of our last shared class of the year. Instead of asking me to lunch like she usually did, Lily asked if I'd go for a walk with her. Again, I didn't exactly know how to refuse, so I said all right. Our campus was bordered by a large patch of woodland. Lily led me into the woods, and the sounds of our fellow students slowly faded away. She sat down on a log, and I joined her. She started talking about how she was going to miss me over the summer. I tried placating her, but I didn't want to be there, especially because she seemed almost on the verge of tears. I think I tried to make an excuse about having plans with my girlfriend, but before I could leave, Lily chose to kiss me without warning. It was uncomfortable to say the least. I got out of there and was happy to think I wouldn't see her for a while. I came back to university after the summer, moving into a house with my friends. Without going off topic, there were some serious issues in my friend group, a lot of petty arguing and worse. I broke up with my girlfriend around the start of that school year as well, and basically the whole mess made me recontextualize things with Lily because it suddenly didn't seem as bad. That said, I didn't want to be alone with her. We mostly talked online. She was still constantly messaging me after all. One upside of everything was that I started dating a boy. Lily was not pleased to hear that news. I think she hoped to sneak in after I broke up with my girlfriend, but as I said before, that was never going to happen. There wasn't a big gap between my break and this new relationship, so she must have thought she missed her chance to be with me. And this is where the story gets bad. At this time, I was fairly active on Tumblr. I occasionally talked about my life and mostly reblogged photos and stuff. I was there one day when something odd happened. One of the blogs I followed had received an ask with some phrases I recognized. It took a second to recognize that it was taken from my About page. That made me freeze. I read the message properly. Someone was asking this completely random person to analyze a section of text from my page, asking for their opinion on the type of person who could write it. I cannot stress how messed up it was to see people talking about me like I was a character in a book that they were trying to study. The reply was basically, "I don't know, sorry." But the important thing was that the question hadn't been anonymous. It linked to someone's blog. Obviously, I wanted to know who had taken such a bizarre interest in me. As far as I knew, no one in real life other than my boyfriend knew about my page. Well, sorry, no prizes for guessing who was behind it. What I found was like a shrine. She was using a fake name, but I recognized Lily all over that thing. It was this cutesy pink and red page. There were a few posts about her interests, but most of the content was focused on her primary interests, me. Most of the posts were about me. There were accounts of things I'd done recently. He told me about such and such, he went to a nightclub recently, etc., as well as references to things from as far back as I'd known her. It was clear she had been keeping tabs on me both online and off, gathering up every scrap of information she could about my life and hoarding it here in her little collection. She talked about us eating lunch together and how special our dates had been to her, as if it was anything more than acquaintances getting food after class. She talked about the time she had forcibly kissed me in the woods, but she wrote it as if it had been mutual. She quoted some lyrics from my favorite song and talked about how she'd always be there for me, no matter who else came into my life. Lots of references to loving me just the way he is, quote unquote, which answered another mystery about an anonymous love letter I'd received earlier that year with the same wording. But it got worse. There were a lot of posts about my boyfriend as well. These weren't so nice. They got vicious, talking about how he didn't deserve me. He didn't know what he had. If she was with me, she'd be jealous of anyone else who came near me, so my boyfriend not being a jealous person meant he didn't love me. It was angry and hateful. I didn't like to think about the sort of person who could write so obsessively, being fixated directly on me. One thing that didn't make sense at first was that the blog also made plenty of references to Lily's best friend, Steven. She had never mentioned this person to me. Her post talked a lot about Steven and how great of a friend he was and how much fun they had together, how he looked out for her, etc. I was trying to work out whether this was an online friend when one specific post made it all click. She had posted a photo and a caption in it with, "Steven sent this to me. He knew I would like it and love it," or something like that. The problem was, the photo was taken from my own page. I hadn't sent it to her. She took it from my page and then claimed this fictional best friend of hers shared it with her because, in her head, she'd split me into two people. In her messed up fantasy life, I was both the perfect best friend who was always looking out for her, and her soulmate who was bound to end up with her when I finally got over my boyfriend and all the other easy girls I hung out with that she made dozens of posts complaining about. Who was she complaining to? Oh, Lily had an audience. She asked open questions about me and her relationship with me and got messages back from her followers, people who took what she had said at face value. I saw a bunch of random people agreeing with the stalker that my boyfriend didn't deserve me, and we were bound to break up soon so I could be with Lily, the person I was clearly supposed to be with. She had this fake fanfiction version of my life up for anyone to share their opinion on, and she'd made herself out to be the hero of it all. I went maybe a month back into their page's history. I didn't look at everything that was there. It was too much. So I'm not sure how long this had been going on, to be honest. I sent Lily a message confronting her about the blog. She said nothing, and I cannot stress how weird it was to have found pages and pages dedicated to me, with her talking about how she was in love with me and would make sure we ended up together, slamming my boyfriend, and building up a fantasy life with two different versions of me and that she clearly believed to be real, then acting like it all didn't happen. She said nothing. She didn't address it. She just changed the subject even after I pushed, and it was like she hadn't even registered what I said. I've never seen anything else like that. She deleted the page, of course, or at least changed the name and hid it so I never found it again. It wasn't the end, though. I wasn't going to hang out with her anymore, but we were still shoved together in classes, and she had started to actually scare me with what she might do next. I'm kind of a paranoid person. Knowing someone was obsessively keeping track of me for who knows how long freaked me out. The next thing she pulled was trying to seduce my boyfriend. It was an absolutely useless attempt that only made him uncomfortable. He told me about it right away. What was her plan there? Did she hope to tell me he cheated and wait for me to break up with him? Why would I want her after that? When that didn't work out for her, she tried hitting on 3 of my other friends. None of them took the bait. She ended up dating one of my former housemates for a while, but made sure to send me messages while they were together, letting me know she'd rather be with me. No thanks. Lily made sure to stay in my life the whole time I was at university. There was a time when I tried to pull away from her and she ended up starting rumors about me and damaging a career opportunity I put a lot of work into. I don't know what else she did behind my back, but it made me realize it was safer to let her think that she was a part of my life while ignoring her, rather than doing something that would cause her to get angry. After I graduated, Lily still wanted to spend time together, but I knew I didn't have to now. I made excuses about work and barely talked to her after that point. I almost entirely stopped posting on social media that I knew she knew about. Of course, she didn't give up that easily. She would try to start conversations, ask me to meet up with her, attempts I usually ignored. I didn't like to think that she was still tracking me online, but she probably was. I don't know how, but she'd occasionally reference things I mentioned online somewhere she shouldn't have known about. The last time we had a real conversation, she sent me a message out of nowhere. We hadn't spoken at all in months, and we haven't talked about anything serious in much longer than that. Thinking about that conversation still makes my skin crawl, but I'll summarize what happened here. At first, she asked me questions about how long I had known that I was bi. I told her some basic stuff, the kind of thing I'd tell anyone who asked. Then she changed the subject. She started talking about how I would feel about her if she was a boy, and wanting to be a boy for me. The messages quickly became very, very weird. She went into plenty of detail about fantasies that she had of the two of us. Again, we were not friends at this point. We'd never been especially close, at least not from my perspective, and we had barely spoken for years. I can't imagine sending messages like that to even a close friend, let alone someone who barely knows you now. I tried telling her not to pull this with me, but she decided to change tactics. She sent photos of herself, followed by a bunch of messages, maybe 4 or 5 a minute, way too fast for me to reply to before the next one arrived, basically quoting back what I'd told her about myself in my past earlier. She was telling me these things as if they had happened to her. She was role-playing as me. The worst part was that she seemed to believe it was real, that those things actually happened to her, even when she was quoting me word for word. Things I told her only hours before were now her life. It was like she was trying to absorb my history, to take it over, to make my life part of her. Yeah, I didn't talk to her again after that. I ignored future attempts she made to contact me, and I eventually silently deleted her from the inactive social media, which was her only way of contacting me. I really thought she might finally move on. A few days ago, she sent me a friend request. It's sitting there unanswered because I know if I delete it, she'll only send another one. Lily and I met nearly 12 years ago. The story is just the highlights, and even then, it's only the stuff I know about for sure. A lot happened behind my back. I know it did. This story takes place in the biggest little city in the world, and it was back when I turned 21 in 2003. Who just Googled the biggest city in the world? It's Reno, Nevada, by the way. It was 2 weeks after my 21st birthday in September, and the night was a little cooler than those hot summer nights, but still good enough to be roaming around downtown into all the casinos and bars. It was me and my homegirl Jen. Yes, we'll use her real name. She also loves and follows Let's Read. and we're out and about on Saturday trying to get a good buzz on before we hit the club. Normally, we would park in a parking garage, have a few drinks, then walk to the club. This time, we wanted to explore more of downtown's other places. We had just come out of the old Fitzgerald Casino, pretty buzzed and ready to take on the night. We walked down the main street towards 4th to see about the other places that looked lively. Well, we came up to Douglas Alley, which my buzz butt had the great idea to cut through because it sounded like fun. Facepalm. Don't judge me. I was on one that night, meaning I was thinking I was king of the world. So Jen agreed to go down the alley. It was dark, damp, and smelly. There was only a few lights up ahead that were flickering on and off like a strobe light. As we walked about 20 feet or so in the alley, I noticed ahead that there was a dark, shadowy figure moving in a weird motion next to what looked like a dumpster. Normally I would brush it off as someone dumpster diving, but what made this seem out of the norm was the fact I could see candlelight flickering off the alley wall. Jen turned to me and said, "Are you sure we should keep going this way? It looks kind of creepy up ahead." I looked at her and kind of taunted by saying, "You scared? Come on, we got this." Looking back now at my remark to her, I think, well, that was kind of a douche thing to do. She reluctantly started walking with me ahead slowly, and as we got closer, the sound of what I can describe to you as a very sinister, evil, and malicious laugh was coming from the dark figure. This was so putrid it made my skin crawl. And it was at this point I said, "Shh, do you hear the other noise? It sounds like a drill or something." She nodded and looked at me with confusion in her eyes. If it really was a drill, what would that figure be drilling? A rat, maybe? We were behind some big crates at this point to where we could see ahead, but couldn't be seen as we were both ducking behind the crates now. The sounds of that laugh were getting more and more deranged every time the drill noise got louder, like it enjoyed doing whatever it was doing. You see, this alley was like a T. We entered it from the bottom, working our way up to the top part of the T. The right part of the alley was where we were with the crates, and the left part was where the dumpster and the shadowy figure was. I hope that helps to imagine the way we were going. "We need to get out of here. This is enough creep show for me for the week," she wailed. And had I listened to her, none of what's about to happen would have. I was feeling like a champion, though. I blamed the Jaeger bombs for that, so I said proudly, "Will you stay here? I'll check it out." Who did I think I was, thinking like that? Yes, the booze made me feel tough, invincible, adventurous. Well, back then, freshly turned 21, booze did make me feel that way. She rolled her eyes at me. "Fine," she whispered. "But if something happens to you, my only weapon of defense are my heels." I chuckled softly to her, gave her a hug to reassure her it would be okay, so I slithered my way ahead alone. Both sounds were getting much louder and even more gut-wrenching. I got close enough to finally see what I had been hearing, but still in the dark behind a few boxes and crates mixed together. I stayed down so I wouldn't be seen, but I could see when I lifted my head up, and to my horror, I saw a man crouching on the ground over something and candles all around him. He was wearing what I could tell were dark, torn clothing and a mask on his face that I'll never forget. If anyone's ever seen Hellraiser, well, the mask was like the combination of Anubis and Pinhead's pins. One of the flashing lights were shining on that mask. It looked so terrifying to me, even buzzed. He clenched the drill in his hands, drilling down with vigorous force while cackling some more. I turned back to throw Jen a look of pure terror. She wasn't there anymore, to my surprise. She was crawling her way up to where I was. "Oh my God, what is he doing?" she whispered to me. I don't know, it looks like some sort of ritual or something. You see that mask? Maybe some kind of cult stuff," I replied. I was curious about what he was drilling into, but at the same time I was very reluctant to know. "I'm gonna go quickly up there to where the dumpster is and find out what he's drilling into. I'll go up to the right side of the dumpster so he won't be able to see me," I told her. It was at this moment that I knew my curiosity was so strong it overtook my brain telling me to stop and go back. But I couldn't help it. That's just how I'm wired. So without wasting any more time, I took a few steps ahead, hugging the alley wall as I moved forward to the dumpster. His attention was distracted by something to his left, so he faced the other way. I then rushed forward quietly to the dumpster. My heart was racing so hard I thought I was going to pee myself. From here, I was inching my way behind the dumpster to his direction. I got as close as I could so I wouldn't be seen. To my utter horror, I saw what he was drilling into. It was a human's upper torso. I couldn't believe my freaking eyes. It was a female's upper torso covered in blood. There was other stuff too, however I couldn't tell what because I couldn't see that closely. He cackled again as the drill went down into her again, now realizing that there was a blade attached to the drill. Like, good God, man, really, who does stuff like that? But I knew I had two options and I had to think fast. One, I could go back to where Jen was and we could get one of those cops on the bikes over that we saw earlier. Or two, I could scream at this guy and threaten him in hopes that he'll stop, tackle him down, and then get the cops. I wasn't looking to be a hero or anything, but my gut instinct said I needed to put a stop to this. I know the person is dead, but this disgusting dude needed to stop. Whoever that is deserves better than this, and I didn't care who you are. And I made up my mind I was going in. YOLO, right? It's the right thing to do, my good deed for the night, even if something does happen. You got this, Harlem, I told myself. And with that, I came out from behind the dumpster and yelled to the man. Hey, freak! What do you think you're doing? The man arose from kneeling slowly to standing and snapped his head over to my direction, looking right at me, his eyes glowing from the mask and the flashing broken light above him, which he raised the drill into the air and pointing it at me as if it were a gun. His clothes were dark, stained with blood and holes and rips in them. It looked like he was walking right out of Tales from the Crypt. I can't let you leave, man. I'm calling the cops. You need to be punished for what you did to that girl, I yelled. Looking back on that now, I realized how stupid I was for even thinking to take on a guy with a drill in his hand, and me, well, with just fists. I was raised to understand that fighting with your fists was the only way to be truly tough, not hiding behind a weapon. I rushed after the man with my fist clenched, ready to pounce like some sort of wild tiger, but as I was about to leap at him, he suddenly dropped the drill and turned around and ran to the left. I hauled it after him, dodging all the crates and boxes that were along the way. He came up to a chain fence, jumped onto it and up. I leaped onto the fence also and grabbed a hold of his right foot, only to be kicked in the head, and I fell down the fence onto the ground. I then heard a loud cry of pain that sounded so deep it echoed down the whole alleyway. I looked up only to see the man's legs sticking out along the side of the fence that I was on, and his upper body along the other side. I felt wet droplets hit me as if it were raining, realizing very quick it wasn't rain. Harlem, what the? Are you okay? Are you hurt? Jen came yelling. I nodded to her yes that it was okay, and I felt the droplets on my face touch them only to have smeared blood on my face. What was going on, I thought. I looked up again at the man who was now wailing in agony. This idiot was stuck in barbed wire, and a small part of the fence was through him. I couldn't believe it. Oh my God, Jen, look. He got impaled when he was trying to jump the fence, I said with a shaky tone. He's still alive. Call 911, she roared. Now, just as I was reaching into my pocket to get my phone, I heard a loud scream of some woman walking by on the other side of the fence. Oh my God, there's blood everywhere. Someone do something, the lady chanted. I'm calling them now, Harlem, Jen stated. Yo, man, you okay? A male's voice said on the other side of the fence. Now we were forming a crowd of people all freaking out on their phones and a bunch of talking over others. Don't move, bro. Wait for the paramedics, another said. At this point, I was totally sober and wondering what to do. This guy might have been the one to butcher up that poor girl's torso and deserve what he got, or he just butchered on her after someone else killed her, Or he found her dead and decided to do that. Now he's up on a fence stake, bleeding and moaning. Should I feel sorry for him? He's obviously a nasty, vile soul. And who was the girl whose corpse was used for some sadistic pleasure? I had all these questions running through my head as I was still recovering from a kick to the face. And with that came the sirens. It was only a matter of time, and here I am, faced with bloodstains, standing next to a half-dying man with half a body just down the way. I was practically pooping my pants. I turned to Jen and said, "This is where it's gonna get ugly, Jen, so hold tight." She put her hand on my shoulder, telling me it's gonna be okay and not to worry. "Get your hands where I can see them. Move them up slowly," screamed the RPD out of nowhere. There's so many more minor details that I could go into, but this has been pretty long, and I'm sure you're all mildly tired of how insane all this sounds, but I swear to God it's 100% true. Fast forward to about 2 weeks later, and I'm sitting in this detective's office for the third time, and this time was because she wanted to share some information with me about that case, what she could share, of course. She tells me that, for one, I've been cleared of all charges involving the girl and this deranged man, and that she really appreciated my cooperation through everything, as if though I had a choice. I told her thank you. I could maybe start getting some sleep now and not having this hanging over my head. 2 weeks of waiting to hear if I was implicated in this was torturous on my mental state. She explained to me that they were looking into a different individual for the murder of, who I'm going to call Hope. Yes, the psychopath man survived the impaling but with major injuries and claimed that he wasn't the one to have killed this girl Hope. He said it was his friend, only to have cut her already dead body up as a form of some sort of sadistic sacrifice for purification or some insanity. Honestly, who even knows if that's true, or if he just said that as a cop-out? I have my own opinions about those kinds of things. I know there are some sick freaks in this world, and I don't doubt things humans do to others, but this was beyond brutal. If that is the case, that explains the candles we saw around the body, and come to learn that there was a pentagram under her body as well. They were charging him with desecration of a human corpse along with some drug charges. Apparently he was high on something when it all happened, but is trying to use this as his defense to label him as mentally ill. Good luck there, buddy. I was also told that he was paralyzed in some areas and could no longer move his right arm. As for the girl Hope, turns out she was a cocktail server in one of the casinos that was located only 2 blocks away from where her body was found. She had left work 3 hours prior, only to end up dead with some guy that she had been serving drinks to. No one knows who it was, only the description of the guy on surveillance. Weird. It was confirmed by the detectives that it wasn't the friend of the deranged dude. Her name tag was found attached to part of her uniform that was found in another dumpster in the adjacent alley. Her real name will always be kept secret. As for the rest of her, sadly, there were no parts of her anywhere to be found in the area even after having the dogs try to sniff more of her out. They scouted for a few nights, only to come up with nothing other than half her uniform, upper torso, and apparently a pair of ruby red heels that one of her friends at work told the detectives she was wearing that night. I don't know about the rest of her. I was only told either what the detectives only knew, or only what she wanted to share, which wasn't much. There was nothing in the papers about her either, or rather, very little information, as the news only reported her as being a Jane Doe. My only thought process is that maybe she was some sort of undocumented from across the border, and just found a job here and ended up how she did. It made me sad then, and sad even now writing this, that for me, 19 years later, there's still no justice for Hope. No more of her was found, no purse, no ID. Who knows even about her family or if she even had one? Maybe kids, maybe not. I hate all of these questions in my head. The case was never solved for all I know, and it still remains a mystery in my mind. Every year around my birthday, I always light a candle for her to hopefully bring her killer to justice and give her peace so her soul can finally rest. And as for the deranged piece of garbage, It turns out he didn't make it in prison. Apparently, he was shivved by someone for drug-related reasons, stabbed multiple times till he bled and died. And I have to say, it's not a loss in my mind. I know he was someone's kid at one point and a human being too, but there's some kind of relief knowing he's down for the count. Sorry if that makes me sound cruel. I promise I'm not. But I just have my own description on what justice means to me. And for whoever really killed Hope, karma will come for you. It'll come for you, chew you up, and spit you out if it hasn't already. I just pray that Hope and her family, whoever they might be, get the peace they so greatly deserve. This didn't happen to me, but my dad. When my parents were still married, my dad would leave Thanksgiving night to go to the Poconos for deer hunting. This was out here in Pennsylvania. Him and his friends went for a few years, but after this year, things changed. My dad and his friends were on their way there on what I think was I-95. Little did they know, they were coming upon a gruesome scene that they would hope to never encounter again. As they made their way down the highway, there was a car accident that had just occurred. No police or rescue were on scene yet, so, being the decent human beings they were, they sprang into action to help. The car was starting to catch fire, and while the other girls who were in the car were able to be taken out, the driver was still trapped inside. My dad was able to open the passenger door and realize that the girl may have died on impact, but he still tried to free her, sustaining a deep cut on his hand from the twisted metal of what was now inside the car. My dad is your typical small Jersey Italian guy, and this girl was of larger size, so with the combination of the mangled car and the heat from the now lapping flames, my dad could not free her from the wreckage. At this point, the flames were now coming from the broken windshield and were starting to burn her face. My dad tried to shield her face from the flames, but it was pointless. He and his friends tried to pull the door off with a winch that was attached to one of the other trucks, but it was too twisted to come off, and they only managed to pull the entire car. My father realized how bad the flames were and got out of the car to save his own life. He did realize that he still had a wife and young daughter at home. During this time, a doctor came upon the scene and was trying to lend aid to the other girls. All the while, everyone was forced to watch in horror while the driver was burning before them. My dad said her face melted like candle wax. His friend, out of some sort of stress reaction, ate almost a week's worth of food from the cooler out of shock, and once they left, he just immediately threw it all up. It was strange. Now, my dad is not a sensitive man, and would be what we call now the epitome of stoic, but this left him devastated. They tried everything they could to save her, but the fact of the matter is, the girl did in fact die on impact. I think my dad just wanted to give her parents closure by being able to say goodbye to their daughter for the last time and see her. My uncle actually died in a car accident the year before I was born, so I think this was his way of trying to prevent what my family went through. We found out later what happened. A guy was driving drunk the opposite way on I-95 and hit a car full of students on their way back to college from visiting family, head on. The other girls survived with minor and moderate injuries. Later, my dad was installing an alarm in a woman's home and asked her about her son when he saw his Marine photo. She informed him that he was permanently injured from an accident one Thanksgiving night. Turns out, there was a third car involved in the accident, but the car was pushed so far away from the others by the collision that no one noticed the man was injured for 45 minutes after the EMS and police arrived. My father's not a perfect man in the least and has a non-violent criminal record, but despite all this, he's still a hero to me. I live in a small town in Canada. Most everyone knows each other, but that doesn't mean the community is the most safe. There are tons of addicts and alcoholics roaming the streets, and if you don't live on one of the safer parts of town, there's a good chance you could be robbed or worse. A kid a few years back had his pot laced and died of an overdose within 20 minutes, so Not the best place to live, I suppose. When I was in 8th grade, I was a pretty lonely kid, and I only had 2 friends that I spent 24/7 with. And with these dear friends of mine, we decided to have a sleepover that we would go get slushies at 10 p.m. on a winter night. Not our smartest decision, but we were dumb 13-year-olds who wanted an adventure. The shop that sold slushies was no more than a 15-minute walk across a football field behind our school, so we figured we'd be fine. But boy, were we wrong. As we were walking towards the football field, there's a hill that you have to walk over to get to it. So, there we were, walking, about to get to the field when we spot a guy, maybe high schooler age, with a bag that had a blueberry design all over it. He seemed lost, but we just kind of smiled and continued walking. He stared at us as we walked along, but we didn't think much of it. We were used to creeps staring, as we all dressed very alternative and had pretty bright-colored hair as well. But as we kept walking and were just a few feet into the football field, he started following us. Again, we didn't think much of it. Small town. The spot was where people usually went, as it was smack center of town and people had fun back there all the time, so we continued on. Halfway through, the dude walking across the football field had just stopped and kept staring at us. At this point, we were kind of freaked out, but still trying to keep things lighthearted. So I take out my phone and start recording with the flash on, as it was incredibly dark outside, and we're just joking around as I'm recording when suddenly my friend, Clara, looks behind us and whispers, "Oh my God, he's following us again." My other friend, Caitlin, looks in the same direction and looks horrified as he was walking through the snow, bag still in hand, and smiling at us. At this point, we were just trying to look casual and not panic, as we knew that it would give away that we knew that he was following us. It had probably changed from a follow to a full-out chase, if you catch my drift. And this goes on for a while as we're trying to get to the shop for our slushies. The dude would follow us for a while, stop to not look suspicious, wait about 3 seconds and start following us again. We were all terrified. 3 middle school kids, the biggest of us being only 5'7" and in the middle of a sketchy town at 10 p.m. I was so sure I was never going to see the light of day again. Once we eventually arrive at the stupid shops, one of my classmates, Cindy, was in there in her friend's car, intoxicated with some sort of substance, and wasn't sure what exactly. When I told her the situation and begged for a ride back to our friend's place, she basically said, "Lol, don't get kidnapped." Wow, thanks. We got our stupid slushies and started heading back to our friend's house, deciding to walk on the side of the busier street rather than across the field again. I was holding onto Caitlin's arm. I was crying from fear, and she was a lot braver than I was. It felt as if though she was protecting me, even as ridiculous as it may have been. Clara was behind us when she suddenly flops onto the concrete and starts sobbing and is covering her head, saying, "He's still following us. He's still following us." Caitlin and I tried to shush her and continue on walking, but she wouldn't budge. She was starting to have a panic attack. Eventually, Caitlin and I basically had to piggyback her until she stopped crying. It was truly a horrendous scene. We eventually made it back to the house at around 11, deciding to go to bed, with the doors and windows locked, of course. Now, you would expect this to be the end of this, and I thought perhaps it was all just some strange overreaction, and when I rationally thought about it, it truly was. But it wasn't. Because the following weekend, my dad called me downstairs. I was confused, and he asked me, "Is this bag yours?" saying he found it on our front porch. I had no idea what he was talking about, until I saw it, and my heart sank. It was the exact blueberry design bag that man had. I told my dad everything related to what we knew about that guy, and he decided to rummage through the bag. All that was inside was just duct tape and a screwdriver. I was confused, but my heart began to sink even further, and I felt almost paralyzed with emotion. Based on what I told my dad, he called a friend of his who was a police officer, but his friend said that there was most likely nothing law enforcement would do if nothing criminal had truly occurred. I honestly don't know how to process what any of this could mean, but I knew my gut that day was telling me that that man with the blueberry bag had far more nefarious plans for us than meets the eye. I lived in a dorm converted from a hotel. There were many problems associated with this. The neighborhood was questionable, and some people still believe the dorm was an actual hotel. So while I can mention this now, the residence assistant took turns at the front desk. In order to enter, you had to have a key card. This will be very important, as it was something of a lifesaver for myself and a friend. On Saturday night at around 11 p.m., the RA, a 19-year-old female friend, asked me to join her down at the front desk. We popped popcorn and watched a movie, but had to keep an eye on a monitor in case someone needed help. We were just settling in when we heard a thump at the door. We looked up and saw this homeless guy trying to open the door. He pressed the button on the door intercom, demanding to be let in and wanting his usual room, he said. The guy was dressed in a dark shirt with white pants stains, pants that desperately needed a belt, uncombed brown hair, and holding a trench coat in one arm. "Let me in. I have money this time." We're not a hotel, I'm sorry. This is a residential property for students. It's a college." The RA told him in a shaky voice. "Oh, shut up. This is a hotel." He was glaring at us. We were getting a little weirded out, and he started to demand that we better let him in or else. Now, this dorm, as I said before, was converted from a hotel, and clearly the guy didn't understand this. He started to make threats if he wasn't let in, and decided to try and break in by ramming himself into the door. The RA was pressing the button for security, who was clear on the other side of the building. His patrol wouldn't get to him where we were for at least 30 minutes. I kept asking if I should call 911, but of course the RA said no, that she could handle this. The crazed man kept ramming himself into the secured door, and suddenly I saw a bloody smear. The coat fell away to reveal his bloody arm. "Let me in," he screams again. My RA friend screamed and was about to call security when, sure enough, security thankfully came out of the bathroom to see this. He rushed over to open the door and remove the guy, led him away. And this incident had led to the electric gate in the parking lot to be installed, as the guy just crossed the parking lot to get to our door. So I'm from Hawaii, and this day took place on the night of Veterans Day. I was at my boyfriend's house that day, and I usually stay there until very late, as my dad doesn't get off of work until 10 p.m. So when 10 p.m. comes around, my dad tells me he's outside that house and that we had to go to my mom's job on the way home because we needed the keys. There we were at my mom's job. Everything seemed normal. There are very few cars left in the parking lot, as all the shops closed for the day. I had to use the bathroom, but there was still nothing unusual about anything. My mom's job isn't located in a sketchy area, and in fact, it's actually located by a really popular hotel on the island. Now, as soon as I exit the restrooms, I walk to my dad's car, as he was already waiting for me. As I walked there, I passed a guy. He was white at around the age of 60 and wearing a veteran's hat and lei. So I assumed nothing of him because I just thought he was coming out of the restaurant nearby. As my dad and I exit the parking lot, I notice the man starts backing up the same time we did. I thought it was odd and didn't say anything to my dad until we got to the part where the road divides into two different roads, as it's going to different cities. I told my dad that I thought the car was following us, and he just brushed it off, as he was probably just going to the same area as we were. I didn't say anything else and just kept watching the car as we made the turn. The man was very close to the car, which didn't make any sense because the roads were very much empty. I decided that I would tell my dad again, and it didn't seem to bother him, and said that we were going home. I told him that was a bad idea, and you need to try and lose him. I've listened to so many scary stories about people being followed, and I honestly wasn't going to take any chances. My dad kept an eye on the car, and I told him to go straight ahead instead of turning onto our road. At this point, all we've been doing is going straight. We haven't made any turns or even tried to lose him. My dad thought it was a good idea to go through a dark, unlit back road to see if we could lose the guy. And guess what? The man followed us the whole way and even past our house trying to get away from him. My dad and I were already arguing because I told him he wasn't listening to me and that we were being followed. I was really frustrated at this time because all I wanted to do was go home and sleep. We got stopped at a red light and I tried to get an idea or some sort of indicators from the man's front plate, but it was really hard to read because he kept getting closer to the car. I asked my dad if he could see them, but he couldn't see them either. And you're probably wondering why we haven't called the cops yet, and I honestly didn't even think about calling them because the first thing that you want to do is get away, and calling the cops wasn't the priority. It's already around 11 p.m. and this man had been following us for almost over an hour. We went from Waianae to Kapolei to Ewa Beach and back to Kapolei, finding places to lose this guy, but every time my dad sped up, he would speed up to keep the space between the cars very small. We even went as far as to going close to where my dad picked me up earlier. It just seemed like nothing would work. My dad and I were still arguing about losing him and that he needed to start making random turns. My dad is really stubborn and didn't want to listen to me. I get that it could be stressful from these types of situations, but I was trying to help with everything I learned from hearing similar stories. We entered another city, but we were 10 minutes away from the police station, and that's when we decided that it was best to call 911. As I made the phone call, this guy speeds in front of us, and my dad was able to get the guy's license plate, and I told the operator everything that happened from the beginning until now. I told her that we were near the police station, and she told us that there would be 2 officers waiting for our arrival. This man is still following us, even to the police station, and we didn't see the officers that were waiting outside, but we did see other officers just getting out of the car. My dad quickly got out and told them that the man was still following us. Keep in mind, my dad parks, and this man actually pulls up and parks next to us after all this time, after chasing us through 3 different cities. The police officers went over and did their whole procedure. My dad filed a police report as it was considered stalking. I don't think the guy even knew what he was doing because they asked him why he followed us, but he didn't give an answer. After the whole ordeal, they arrested him and told my dad that he could possibly have some mental issues and will be sent to the hospital for further investigation, and someone will be in contact. After that was done, we left and we already had to go back to pick up my mom. Until this day, no one has ever contacted my dad about this situation, and he gets really paranoid like me when the same car starts to follow us for a while. I told him that if it ever happens again, to listen to me. I'm glad we made it safe through, and you never really think that it would happen to you until it does, and it's terrifying. So a bit of context, I'm a 15-year-old girl, but at the time this happened in April, I was 14. I'll also add that I look my age, so he definitely couldn't have mistaken me for someone older. Ever since online school started, I've become a bit of a couch potato. Sure, I play sports, but I'm not nearly as active as I prefer to be. So I decided I was going to ride my bike around more often. I live in a pretty safe area. Other than the occasional catcallers and creeps, I never really worried about someone approaching me. And that was until this happened. One day after my last class had finished, I collected my small backpack, which had some money, my phone, and a mask in it, and went out to grab my bike. I let my brother know that I was going and jokingly told him that if I wasn't back by 2 that I'd been kidnapped. I joke like this all the time. I hopped on my bike and rode out in my neighborhood and then took a back road to some abandoned golf courses. Now the way they're laid out is there's 3 that all connect and go through 2 different neighborhoods. At the end of the furthest one, there's a CVS right across the road and an intersection there too. Think of it as if though it's a T. The intersection is at the top of the T, and the road separating the golf course and the CVS is the main body. So after I finished biking the last course and reached the incline where I would ride down to the sidewalk to that road that I had mentioned, I stopped to check my phone, and that's when I heard someone calling over to me. Hey, Maddie. I looked up because that's just what I do whenever I hear something. Now, my name isn't Maddie, nor is it close to it, but there was no one else around. The guy calling out was on a bike, and he was on the sidewalk around 10 feet away down the incline. I couldn't get a good look at his face because he had a baseball cap on and sunglasses, but from what I could see, he looked to be about in his mid-20s. He was comparatively tall. I'm only about 5'5". He was wearing sunglasses and a baseball cap, and this didn't strike me as weird because it was pretty hot out, but it was pretty weird that he'd biked over just to talk to me. He kept calling me Maddie, though. Now, it should have been a red flag that a man who looked to be in his mid-20s was talking to a 14-year-old girl as if she were some sort of old-time friend. But I kind of smiled awkwardly and told him that my name wasn't Maddie. He asked what it was, and like the dense rock that I am, I told him. He was just like, "Oh, really? Can you come here? I can't really see you from up there." Mind you, I couldn't have been more than 10 feet away, and I could see him fine. He seemed to be able to spot me fine from over 20 feet just moments ago. I declined and said I didn't want to crowd him because of the whole global pandemic thing, but he kept insisting that I just come down so he could get a better look at me. Finally, after what felt like an hour but was only about 5 minutes, he gave some half-hearted goodbye and biked off across the intersection, but the whole time he kept staring at me. I waited until he was out of sight before I rode down the incline and across the street to the CVS, and I went inside to get a drink. When I got out, there was no sign of him, and my ride home was peaceful. When I told my mom about where I went, I got chewed out big time for going alone. It was only worse when I told her about the weird guy. Now, I wouldn't have typed this out if that was all that happened, so of course, something else did happen. Not to me, but to some other girls. A few days later, my mom told me that there was some guy on a bike who had been biking up to girls around my age and ramming his tire into their back tires in an attempt to make them crash so he could abduct them. He ended up getting chased off by one of the girls' dads before he could hurt any of them, thankfully. When I asked for his description, my mom told me that he was tall, male, and looked to be in his mid-20s. He also had a baseball cap on. I asked where he'd done this, and it was in the same area where I had encountered that guy. Now, I'm not saying for all certainties that these guys are all the same people, but the comparisons are eerily similar, and how dead set he was on me coming down to where he was really put me off. I guess just knowing the fact that if I had come closer to him that day, that I might not be typing this, and that my little kidnapping joke may not have stayed a joke.
What do you do if the only thing standing between you and a hulking monster is a flimsy piece of plywood? How about if you're confronted by an eldritch horror on your way home on a rainy night? Oh yeah, and also, you're 10 years old in both these scenarios. Listen to these stories and find out. Dear Mr. X, my name is Brian. Something strange and terrifying happened to my younger sister and I on an old logging trail in Oregon. I grew up in a very odd family, to put it politely. We've always been very poor, and my mother's relationship with her husband has been rocky at best. They've been separated on and off many times throughout the years. Exactly when I came into the picture is a matter of debate, and as a result, I happen to be what they call a bastard. My siblings and I have been getting bounced back and forth between one parent's custody and the other for about as long as any of us can remember. Despite the fact that my mother loved us to death, she had a hard time keeping herself out of jail, which ended up with us kids being shipped back to Dad. My dad, as you'll soon see, is a self-proclaimed hobo/nomad. We spent many of our youthful years living with him, traveling up and down the state of Oregon, hitchhiking from place to place. Eventually, my dad somehow came into possession of an old beat-up car that served as our home. 4 kids and 1 man living in a crappy sedan. Being the oldest of the bunch, I often played the role of protector when my dad wasn't around, which was pretty often. Eventually, he started running out of money and decided to move us up into the mountains of Klamath Falls. A friend of his told him about an abandoned shack out in the woods along an old logging trail. We found the shack and holed up there. One day, my dad and my brother Dan went into town to get some supplies, leaving me with my other brother Eric and my sister Jackie. We were still just kids, so we were able to have plenty of fun while living out in the woods, despite the harsh conditions. After all, I'm pretty sure that most kids could only dream of being able to live out in the wilderness like that, albeit preferably under more pleasant circumstances. I can't pretend it was fun living with chipmunks and other nuisances constantly nibbling at our few possessions, though. It's important to note that we were in a dangerously shoddy wooden shack with paper-thin walls. It was probably about the size of a very small bedroom. It was really only worth living there because it was roomier than the car and had a decent roof on it. The door was nothing but a single piece of warped plywood. After my dad left us alone, Eric and I sat on the couch that was against the back wall of the shack, reading old magazines while Jackie played with a couple of dolls on the floor. Eric shot up when we heard the sound of something like a branch breaking off a tree. I whispered for him to stay silent as I slowly raised myself up off the dilapidated cushion, straining to listen through the light, creaking noises of the couch's stale wooden frame as I scooted closer to the wall. Again, the wall itself was really nothing more than about an inch of plywood. Eric sat anxiously, frozen solid with fright and confusion. Another snap cut through the stagnant air. This time, I could tell for sure that the sound was coming from behind the house. A third cracking noise rang out, followed immediately by a fourth, making me flinch away from the wall. More noises began to fill the air, each one louder and closer than the last. Acting instinctively to protect my siblings, I sank down to the floor, yanking Eric down with me toward Jackie. I pulled the ratty knit blanket over our heads, a super effective hiding place in the minds of children. I still remember the blue light filtering through the fabric, tinting everything under the blanket, as we sat motionless, waiting for whatever was outside to pass us by. To our horror, the snapping appeared to stop just outside the wall behind us. Whatever it was close enough to grab us if it wanted to. It started walking again, seemingly tracing the borders of the shack. It stopped again in front of the door. I looked out through the blanket to see what I could. The sun's rays peered back at me through the holes in the rotted-out walls of our makeshift home. It was only then that I noticed I could no longer hear the noises of birds or other animals in the woods. The normally lush soundscape of the mountains had gone completely dark. The air felt thick and heavy. Something was standing just outside the door. After what felt like hours, the sound of something massive walking erupted again. This time, returning on the path it came from. That's actually all I remember of that day, but it remains one of the most vivid and terrifying memories I've ever experienced. Sincerely, Brian. Story number 2. Dear Mr. X, my name is Mark. I live in the UK and am currently a history teacher. I just celebrated my 29th birthday. I recently saw your video on alien encounters and I couldn't help but remember back to a rather odd event from nearly 20 years ago. I know it may seem unreal, but I remember every detail with intense clarity. It's really quite scary. The year was 1998 or 99, around late autumn. I recall the trees being almost bare, with night falling early around 6 p.m. The TV glowed with advertisements for Christmas toys. Around 8 p.m., my parents sent me to the Chippy, our local chip shop, to pick up dinner. Although I was only 10 or 11 years old, it was a normal chore for me, being only about 5 or so minutes walk away. On top of that, I lived in a very quiet neighborhood with well-lit streets. It was a chilly night. I remember I could see my breath puff out with every exhale. I was wrapped in a big, thick green coat, scarf, hat, and gloves. A funny image indeed. It was drizzling out, and there were puddles everywhere. I made it to the Chippy and was on my way back home within about 10 minutes. As I made it back to my street, a weird feeling came over me, making me feel extremely alert and on edge. It's hard to explain, but something suddenly felt off. There was a strange silence except for the light pattering of the rain all around me. The air seemed to be unusually clear and thin. No cars or passers-by, nothing but the rain. I hurried down the street toward my house with my guard way up. A few steps later, a creeping, rapidly overwhelming sense of dread fell upon me, which made the chill in the air feel like a stinging assault on my body. I stopped dead in my tracks, with my mouth agape. I saw it from a short distance away, only about 6 houses down the road from me. I couldn't tell if it was a person or a thing. It was definitely shaped vaguely like a human, but gray, slippery looking, tall and sexless with a muscular build, a large oblong head and arms noticeably longer than its legs. It turned the corner at the end of my street and was in a full sprint, running directly at me. It was as if I knew it was there before it was even in my line of sight, and suddenly it burst into view, charging at me with terrifying speed. I was frozen with fear as I gazed upon this otherworldly creature with a barely conscious curiosity. My heart was pounding against my ribcage faster than I'd ever felt it before. My mind was almost completely blank. All I could see or hear was the splashing of puddles as the unearthly creature hurled itself towards me until it was within arm's reach. The last thing I remember was staring into its emotionless face. Its large, soulless eyes weren't visible to me until it was too late. I could feel the seething, malicious intent of it as it came to me. It made almost no sound other than the puddles. Somehow my memory goes black after that moment. I woke up the next morning and my dad told me that I didn't get home until after 9 p.m., which I was unfortunately bullocked for. I acknowledge that it could have all been a dream, but I remember it so well. I normally try to explain away things of this nature, but it's one of the earlier, more pure memories that I have. I was only about 10 or so years old. Well, my friend, Mr. X, I'm now creeped out by my own story and about to go to bed. Totally worth it, though. Thank you again for taking an interest and listening to my story. Best regards, Mark.
Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. I release new videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 7 p.m., even though I know today was late, but had a rough night last night. And if you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r/letsreadofficial, and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations for just $1 a month on Patreon, and maybe even pick up some Let's Read merch on Spreadshirt. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all of these stories in long compilation form and save huge on data, located anywhere you listen to podcasts. All the links are down in the bio. Thanks so much, friends, and I'll see you again soon.